You've found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. It was a wonderful autumn day. Under the azure sky, trees painted in gold and crimson radiated a soft, warm glow. The air, transparent and fresh, was intoxicating with the scents of wet earth and fallen leaves. A man sat on a bench in the old park, watching a large Labrador. The dog, with magnificent gold-tinged fur shimmering under the rays of the unusually bright autumn sun, frolicked with visible delight among the tree trunks, racing across the carpet of fallen leaves. Suddenly he stopped abruptly and, with a run-up, plunged into a pile of leaves, burying himself head first and raising a multicolored whirlwind around him. Crouching low, the dog froze, fixing his gaze on his owner. "Well, why are you frozen there, glued to the spot? Come here, let's jump together, it's so much fun," his gaze seemed to say. The dog snorted loudly several times, trying to clear his nose of clinging cobwebs and bits of leaves, then picked up a small twig and dashed towards the bench with all his might. "Well, Sam?" The owner affectionately ruffled the dog's neck as he ran up and carefully wiped a cobweb from his nose. "You're really playful today, just like a puppy." The dog lifted his muzzle, and his large, shining eyes stared into the man's face. His tail wagged desperately, and the dog's whole body trembled impatiently. Sam sat down, raised a paw, and looking questioningly at his owner, whimpered softly. "Calm down," the man laughed cheerfully. "What's this attack of youth today? Did you come to challenge me to play? No, I can't. This will pass. Later, others will jump, but around me." The man chuckled quietly again, but this time the laugh held bitterness. "If only Jack were here with us. He would run with you." The man suddenly fell silent, his face contorted as if in pain, and he added, forcing the words out with difficulty, "And if Sarah were with us, she, I'm sure, would definitely jump with you. I remember all your antics. It was she, Sarah, who taught you, right?" The dog, hearing the familiar sounds of a beloved voice and dear names, yelped, wagged his tail furiously, and sat down beside the bench, still clenching the broken twig in his teeth. Evidently, he hadn't completely given up hope of involving his owner in the fun game. However, just sitting nearby and feeling the touch, he was clearly happy. The man, continuing to stroke the dog's head automatically and habitually running the silky ears between his fingers, inhaled the delicious fresh autumn air with pleasure and closed his eyes. Memories, joyful and bitter, bright and sad, suddenly flooded over him. Their family was not particularly well off. Mom worked as a librarian her whole life and joked with slight bitterness that, fortunately, she managed to retire before the internet destroyed all libraries. Father was a foreman at a factory, and all his limited free time was spent rustling newspapers, looking suspiciously at his wife, and demanding good grades from his son. Dave loved his mother dearly, and he even feared his father a little, though he loved him with some strange, forced love. Robert remained a distant, incomprehensible, and stern man to his son. It was terrible, but Dave could never change his attitude towards his father. Perhaps, as he grew older, the boy might have understood his relative better, built a relationship. But there wasn't enough time for that. Robert died suddenly. 9-year-old Dave was left with his mother, who, after Robert's death, grieved as if she had lost not a gloomy, perpetually dissatisfied husband who constantly suspected her of imaginary infidelities, but a loving spouse. After school, David entered university for an engineering degree. He doubted the correctness of his choice. A relative came to his rescue, his mother's own brother. Uncle Bill had a small car workshop in his garage where he repaired and resold cars. All this tinsel, these little lawyers and traders, it's all temporary, needed today, gone tomorrow, he rumbled in his smoky bass, listening to his nephew. And what kind of work is that, God forgive me, for a real man, shuffling papers and fooling others? Pah! But I have real man's work. Uncle Bill proudly straightened up and began pounding his chest with a rather impressive fist stained with ingrained motor oil. "And I'll always have clients and work. I'll always earn a piece of bread and butter, and if I want, even with caviar. And you, Dave, come on over to me. I'll set you up. You'll start actually doing what they cram into you theoretically in your universities. Plus, you'll start earning some money. Stop living off your mother." This was an argument, and a very weighty one. Dave had long tried to do odd jobs wherever he could, but all of that, combined with his mother's modest pension and his even more modest student stipend, was barely enough to live on. Work at his uncle's workshop immediately clicked for Dave. He turned out to be a person with an innate technical knack and intuition. Everything he saw and did interested him, and he wanted to know and be able to do even more. "Yes, Dave, your hands certainly grow from where they should," his uncle would say. "Add more brains to these hands, and you'll be priceless. Keep learning," he would bark sternly for educational purposes. Dave learned easily, with pleasure. In the evenings and on weekends, he worked in the workshop, quickly gaining practical experience. After just a year, he was calmly entrusted with independent repairs, initially in simple cases, but over time, more responsible and complex ones. Time flew by quickly, and 5 years later, by the time he graduated from university, David Robert Borisov was already an accomplished master who, despite his youth, enjoyed a fairly solid reputation among car owners, perpetually worried about endless breakdowns. "Oh, Davy, that's so good. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of you." Mom proudly stroked her son's new diploma with her palm. "It's a very proper profession for a man." "Yeah, Mom, you think so?" Dave glanced playfully at his mother. "But if I were a lawyer now, that would be more prestigious. And my hands would be clean," he added, looking at his palms covered in calluses, small scratches, and indelible spots of technical oil. "Nonsense, son. That's rubbish. My dear brother Bill talks a lot of unnecessary things, of course, but he's right about this. You have a wonderful man's profession," Mom smiled. "Just don't laugh, Davy. But I've always thought that the ideal family is when the husband is an engineer and the wife is a doctor." "Mom, you're something else," Dave burst out laughing. "Why a doctor specifically? Oh, come on, that's silly. I, for example, will definitely never under any circumstances be able to love a woman doctor. I think they're all somehow frozen." Son and mother laughed cheerfully and were happy. The categorical way Dave judged women doctors was not accidental. It was difficult to explain, but something connected with medicine caused him unpleasant feelings from early childhood. Davy desperately sabotaged trips to the clinic, screamed during appointments, and hid from the pediatrician called to the house. As an adult, David never even went to the clinic, being a healthy person and completely convinced that a cough and a runny nose were not reasons to die. He habitually ignored medicine, just like seasonal colds. However, this time he couldn't get out of visiting medical institutions. He needed certificates for replacing his driver's license. "Who's last?" Dave asked, approaching the office door, addressing the fellow sufferers sitting along the wall. "Not last, but next. I am," one of them mumbled, and receiving no reaction, looked up at David. "You'll be after me. Hey, after me. Do you hear? Man, can't you hear?" The man indignantly tried to attract Dave's attention. But David neither heard nor saw anything around him except an incredible, somehow unearthly creature walking, or rather floating, down the shabby clinic corridor. A magical vision in the form of a short, slender young woman in a white coat flashed past the frozen Dave and disappeared behind the office door. He sank onto a chair next to the angry, next man in confusion and suddenly felt his heart pounding furiously. He entered the office in a semi-conscious state, glad it wasn't an examination. A young woman sat at the desk by the window, and the sun's rays, tangled in strands of reddish hair, created a halo effect above her head. "Hello, come in, sit down," a voice that sounded angelic to Dave said. "Are you complaining about anything? Are you taking any medications?" she asked, without lifting her head, quickly writing something on the form in front of her. "What?" Dave asked foolishly, unable to take his eyes off the doctor's golden radiance. "Are you taking any medications?" She lifted her head and looked carefully at his face. Dave's breath caught, blood rushed to his cheeks, and his legs trembled. What? What? That was all the unfortunate man could stammer out. Okay, let me see your hands. She walked decisively towards David, who sat like a statue, and he caught a light, barely perceptible scent of perfume. Roll up your shirt sleeves higher. Higher still, please. Good, you can lower them. Look at me. No, not like that. She reached out and gently lifted Dave's head with a soft movement, looking intently into his face. Do you feel unwell? Please don't answer that. What? Dave predictably said. Okay, David Robert, she said, looking at the documents. You're behaving, to put it mildly, a little strangely. What's wrong with you? She looked very carefully at his face again. I love you, Doctor, David said in confusion. The doctor, Sarah Miller, as her badge read, froze. Her face, professionally focused, suddenly became bewildered. Do you need this certificate that badly? She suddenly asked quietly, sitting down next to Dave. I'll write you the certificate, David Robert. You don't have to go to such extreme measures for that. No, doctor, no. Sarah Miller, this isn't for a certificate. This is for life. And David, looking directly into her eyes, laughed loudly. A few months later, Sarah and David got married. Dave's mother, happy, incredibly rejuvenated by this happiness, constantly caught her son's eye, and several times, unable to resist, pointed at Sarah with her eyes and giggled joyfully, like a girl. Their love was not like an all-consuming passion. They didn't need to be with each other every minute, every second of their lives. They didn't demand or expect sacrifices and self-denial from each other. It was enough for them that they had each other, and neither he nor she needed anything more. Although Sarah did try to get something out of Dave, without success. You know, Dave, you really should get checked out. It's not a joke, you know, and you're not exactly young anymore, let's say. Well, you've brought problems on yourself, David grumbled. I was living without a care, and now I get a home medical examination. Sally, stop it. Everything's fine with me. And anyway, the less you know, the better you sleep. He laughed. Oh, really? She shook her head disapprovingly. Words worthy of a teenager. Okay, I won't force you. You're a big boy. It's your life. Sarah did manage to persuade her husband to get examined. They examined him for a long time and tediously made him sit, lie down, attached some clips, suction cups, then looked at the results with a smart expression. In the end, they told him to avoid heavy exertion, eat less fried, smoked, spicy, and salty food. In short, everything that tastes good. However, David didn't delve into the details at all. The main thing for him was to calm Sarah down. He was also prescribed some pills, which Dave, with innocent eyes, swore to Sally he would take regularly and naturally, immediately forgot about them as soon as he left the house. Dave loved Sarah very much and was completely happy. Sally, as far as he could tell, was quite content with life and would have been happy too, if not for one but. Sarah very much wanted a child, but despite all their efforts, a baby remained just a dream for now. Sally, don't be so upset. We'll make it. What's the rush? Dave said, sitting next to Sally on the sofa. My own parents had me when they were almost 40. And look, I turned out all right. Do you have any complaints about me? Only substantial ones, please. Joker? Sarah lightly hit her husband's head with her fist. Always joking. Well, yes. You, of course, are in no hurry. Sally shook her head sadly. You, my dear man, only men and wine get better with age. But I'm a woman, you see. I only get older with the years. Sarah, what nonsense! Where did you pick up such foolishness? Dave looked at Sarah in surprise. It's not foolishness. It's the truth, Davy. You know what they call people like me in medicine if they're expecting a child? Sally looked at her husband questioningly. Elderly primigravida. She clearly pronounced the unpleasant word and smiled bitterly. So you have everything ahead of you. But I need to get moving. And you, by the way, too. Sally shook off her despondency and, as was her custom, ended the difficult conversation with a joke. Hear that, my beloved husband, get moving. She jumped up from the sofa and stood before him, hands on her hips. David looked at Sarah, girlishly slender, thin, light, with reddish hair that hadn't faded at all over the years. He looked at her familiar face, looked into her eyes, in which, as one of their friends said, "Devil's dance," and felt the familiar, demanding, irresistible desire that hadn't diminished with age. He jumped up, grabbed his beloved, and the higher powers seemed to have heard this conversation. Exactly 9 months later, elderly primigravida Sarah, who carried the entire pregnancy like a 20-year-old girl, easily and quickly gave birth to a boy. Dave, bewildered by the experiences, unfamiliar thoughts and anxieties, held his son for the first time, looking fearfully at the pink, wrinkled face. The answer was an unexpectedly serious gaze. "Redhead!" the happy father exclaimed. "Sarah, he's a redhead, just like you." "He's not a redhead at all." Sarah took the child from Dave, who stood awkwardly bent over, like all new fathers, afraid to move and drop the precious bundle. "He's simply golden, our golden boy." They named their son Jack. Long awaited, suffered for, late, of course, he was the light of their lives, a joy and a hope for his parents. Jack grew into a healthy and intelligent boy. He didn't shine with special talents, but he studied without failing, which is to say, normally. He drew quite well, strummed the guitar, avidly played computer games like all boys, but at least didn't become addicted and allowed his parents to take him to the dacha with pleasure, where shashlik and pie awaited him. However, these joint family evenings and trips for the three of them became less frequent. The reason was David's busy work and business. By the time Jack turned 10, David Robert was already firmly on his feet, owning several workshops and car service centers. And it all started with that very workshop of his uncle's, where he began working part-time from his first year at university. Childless, greatly aged Bill, a few years after Dave graduated from university, completely handed over his workshop to his nephew. In doing so, he bargained for the right to come at any time, and, if desired, as he put it, shake off the dust, joining in some simple repair. However, in most cases, Bill's visits amounted to discussing David's skill and business acumen. "Look at that," he would explain with pleasure and feeling to some old client or friend. "It was me who made Dave get into all this back then. Without me, he'd be shuffling papers somewhere now. But with me, he became a master. And what a master. See, honestly, he's already bought equipment there. It doesn't even fit in the space anymore. You hear, he tells me, 'I'm opening a second workshop, Uncle Bill. I'm going to make a chain of services.' What a fool. You hear? Can you imagine the taxes they'll slap on him now? And he'll take out more loans for the equipment, and for the rent, and for the salaries for all those idlers. Does he need that? He should sit quietly, turn screws for bread and caviar. After all, he has golden hands and a head that works, God bless him. But no, he's climbing God knows where." Bill would break into a smoker's cough, shake his head indignantly, and wave his arms, his eyes gleaming with pride for his nephew. David's business was large and troublesome, and it took up more and more of his time. "Dave, something's come up. Jack and I thought about it, discussed it, and decided to get a dog." Sarah looked intently at her husband, who had unexpectedly stayed home that evening and hadn't rushed off somewhere, as usual, on an urgent call. "A dog?" David was shocked and indignant. "Do you have any idea what a dog is in the house? It's noise, fuss, fur, dirt. They bring all sorts of germs into the house." He thought for a moment and added for some reason, "Fur everywhere, you understand. And most importantly, Sally, you have to walk it, the dog, every day." Sarah looked at Dave mockingly, and at his last sentence, she burst into cheerful laughter. "Every day? Really?" She shook her head, playfully feigning surprise. "I really don't know what to say. You've simply amazed me. Imagine, walking it every day. I always thought dogs peed once a week. You take it out, say on Tuesday, and forget about it until next week." "Are you mocking me?" David stated, looking at Sarah, shaking with silent laughter. He generally liked dogs, but preferred to do so from a distance, abstractly, so to speak. It just so happened that he never had pets in his childhood or youth. True, when he was about 12, much to his alarm, he was given an aquarium with fish, which, despite all his efforts, somehow quickly and quietly died. Dave then felt a strange inner relief, which, of course, he carefully hid from his family. Keeping a dog, in his understanding, was an extremely complicated matter, involving endless troubles and the necessity of doing things he absolutely didn't want to do. For example, trudging outside in the rain and slush instead of lying on a comfortable sofa under a cozy, fluffy blanket and watching his favorite movie. "Why do you need this?" David made another attempt to influence his wife. "Why do you need a dog too? Don't you have enough worries with us?" Sarah looked into his eyes. "I don't have enough worries, can you imagine? And especially, I don't have enough of you." Sarah lowered her hands, moved away, and sat on a stool, and then she suddenly added in a completely different tone. Hearing it, Dave looked up at Sally in surprise. He had never heard such a voice from her. Dry, somehow alien. "I don't understand why you're worried about the inconveniences associated with a dog. You're never home anyway. What difference does it make to you who lives here?" He gasped indignantly. And Sarah, without letting him object, continued, "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, my dear. So let's talk now, since things have turned out this way. We miss you. Do you understand? Both of us. Your endless travels, business trips. You've been coming home just to sleep for a long time now. What am I saying? Just to sleep. We don't even see you at night. Do you think I don't know you've gotten into the habit of sleeping on the sofa in the living room?" "Sally, I do that so I don't wake you up." Dave looked at his wife with indignation. He was very hurt that everything he considered his great personal sacrifice for the sake of the family was now being held against him. "Sally, I work like a dog. I earn money for you, you know. So you have everything." David was almost shouting. "I do all this for you. For you, by the way." "You don't have to do it for me," Sarah replied quietly. "Hear that? If you want to do something for me, for Jack, just please be with us more often and longer." Dave's throat somehow tightened. "Sally, I'll try," he said, and added, "Forgive me, my dear." "Try. I forgive you." Sarah looked up at him, habitually tucked her unruly red strands behind her ears with a familiar gesture, and added mockingly, "And we're getting a dog anyway." A couple of weeks later, a funny fat Labrador puppy, tripping over his own paws, appeared in the house. "Oh, Sally, you even chose a dog just like you, a redhead," David exclaimed, laughing foolishly. The Labrador's eyes were circling a certain coffee table with suspicious persistence. There was clearly a plastic folder with business papers within the puppy's reach, and Dave really disliked the intense attention Sam, as they named the young hooligan, was paying to it. "You're both kind of... well, anyway, it's good with you." Dave fumbled for words and immediately jumped up with a mournful cry. The puppy needed only a second to swipe the coveted folder from the table and try to disappear with it into the depths of the apartment. Even caught by the scruff of his neck, Sam tried to defend his prey, and the folder, finally in Dave's hands, was already considerably chewed and slobbered on. "Sally, I take it back," he shouted. "With you, yes, it's good. But with this parasite, it's impossible. What a scoundrel! And how did he manage to chew, tear, and slobber all over it in a few seconds?" The puppy sat behind Sarah's legs with an almost human smirk on his face, and she laughed cheerfully. This was just the beginning. While Sam grew up, David lost count of the ruined shoes and torn wallpaper, and the number of documents carelessly left unattended that the tailed shredder ruined was beyond counting. Moreover, Sam persistently chose things that belonged to the head of the family. "He just loves you, you see? He loves you in a special way. That's why he chooses things that are yours, that smell of you," Sarah would say cheerfully, comforting her husband. "Well, then I'm the one who should beat him," David joked grimly, sadly examining the latest evidence of the puppy's special love for him. And yet, Sarah, as always, turned out to be right. Sam became a true friend to all of them, and even united their already happy family. Everything collapsed in an instant. Sally was hit by a car driven by a drunk kid. She was brought to the hospital in critical condition, where she died a few minutes later. Dave learned of Sarah's death by phone. They called him from her mobile. "Sally, darling, hello?" he shouted into the receiver, answering the call. "Sally, listen, you always scold me. But imagine, I threw everything aside and bought tickets for the three of us to the sea. We're flying on Monday. Come on, arrange your leave at the hospital urgently. Sally, Sally, hello, can you hear me?" He suddenly fell silent, feeling rather than hearing the suspicious silence on the line. And suddenly he became scared. The silence suddenly turned into something sticky and suffocating. It seemed to envelop him, making his heart beat faster and faster. "Excuse me," a stranger's voice sounded on the phone. "Are you David Robert Borisov?" "Yes," Dave croaked back, his voice suddenly hoarse. "And who is Sarah Miller to you? Is she your spouse?" "No, she's my wife," he replied, not understanding the word spouse, not grasping anything. What kind of spouse was his Sarah? A spouse was something large, awkward, tiresome, like an old wardrobe. But Sally was his wife, his beloved, his friend, his sunshine, his happiness for life. "I'm very sorry, but I must inform you. There was an accident. She died without regaining consciousness. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do." The stranger's voice kept saying something, and Dave held the phone, clenching it with his fingers, trying to grasp one simple thought. Sally, his wife, his beloved, his friend, his happiness for life, was no more. The following days passed in a haze, a fog. He went or drove somewhere, did something, answered words, handshakes, calls from people, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was his double doing all this, while he himself, the real David, was watching everything from the side. He saw his double take Sarah's body from the hospital, saw how this same double sat silently beside Sally's coffin, accompanied it to the cemetery, and lowered it into the grave. Then he, this same double, returned home, walked the sad Sam, hugged him, lay down on the sofa, and closed his eyes. The morning after the funeral, Dave was completely alone. Even that imaginary double, who had seemingly done all the hard work for him and seen Sarah off on her last journey, disappeared. The morning was sunny and bright. David woke up to a sunbeam dancing on his face, tickling and blinding him. "Who didn't close the curtains yesterday?" "Some housekeeper," he muttered, getting out of bed. "My mood's completely off. Didn't I get enough sleep or something? And Sarah ran off somewhere early this morning. I wish she'd come back soon," Dave thought lazily. "Sally won't come. Never. You'll never see or hear her again. Never." The thought flashed mercilessly in his head, and as if in response to this thought, something tore in his chest with unbearable pain, seeming to crush his ribs and tear his insides. A frightened Sam darted around his owner lying on the floor, barking softly. A scared, sleepy Jack ran in at the sound, called an ambulance, which, fortunately, arrived on time. After the heart attack, David, thinner and quieter, realized he would have to learn to live again. Learn not to think in the mornings why Sarah wasn't calling them for breakfast. Get used to not waiting for weekends to rush out of town, the three of them. He, Jack, and Sally, taking Sam with them. Not to remember that he shouldn't turn on this American movie because Sarah couldn't stand the actor in the lead role. He was literally going crazy from these constant, involuntary lapses into the past, and the painful returns from there back to reality, where there was no Sally. Having recovered a little, David started going not to the office, but to the car workshop. And the old, faithful work he had been devoted to for so many years repaid him in kind. It accepted him like a good friend, occupied his hands, time, and thoughts. David gladly put on his old, greasy overalls, which he hadn't worn for many years, and to the astonishment of the mechanics and everyone else, who looked at him like a demigod, he climbed into the car pit. At first, the service workers looked at him with surprise. They felt awkward in his presence. In the eyes of those around him, it was clearly written, "What whim has come over him? It's some kind of nonsense. The man has money to burn, and he's sitting under cars up to his ears in motor oil, bruised all his fingers, eating some rubbish. It's all incomprehensible, strange. And anyway, he's hanging around here unnecessarily. Now you can't even sneak out for a smoke." Days passed, months went by, and he continued to work in the car workshop for several hours a day regularly, alongside everyone else. Having gotten used to the owner's presence, the workers greeted him warmly and sincerely and called him Rob among themselves. If he, busy with his main big affairs, suddenly didn't come to the workshop, they knew he was already missed. "Maisie, hi!" the mechanics shouted to the incredibly beautiful girl secretary from the central office. "Do you need the boss? He's in the third bay today." Mary habitually rushed in the indicated direction with a stack of documents. Work binges. That's what the firm's employees jokingly called the times when David disappeared into the workshop. "He's gone mad." Uncle Bill, quite old now but still keeping his face to the grindstone, diagnosed Dave. "Dave, you were a fool, and you've remained one, even though your head is already gray. You're the owner. What are you rattling around with metal parts for?" "What should I do? Shuffle papers?" Dave snorted. "And who taught me my whole life that I should do a man's job?" "Well, I'm not taking back my words, but in short," the uncle was clearly flustered. "It's still somehow wrong. It's because you're alone. You're lonely. That's why you're acting up. You need a woman." Bill, with his directness and spontaneity, hit the sorest spot. David was indeed very lonely. When Sarah was with him, he wasn't alone for a single second of his life. He felt they were together, even if Sally was far away. But the pain was there. Mom and Sam, of course, were nearby. But his son, his only, beloved, cherished son, did not fill the emptiness that had appeared in his father's life. Sarah's death, for some reason, didn't bring Jack and David closer, as it seemed it should have, but on the contrary, divided them. 16-year-old Jack, having grieved for his mother loudly and demonstratively, withdrew into himself, into his own world. To his father's attempts to talk, to become closer, Jack replied with rude frankness, "Dad, let's be honest. You won't replace Mom anyway, and you were never much of a father. No, I have no questions about money and all that. No point arguing there. But don't try to get inside me." Dave learned. Jack was quite decent, didn't demand anything extra, and had no bad or suspicious habits. But the feeling that he was living in the same apartment with an almost stranger, a completely unknown person, did not leave David. He should have been beaten like Smith's goat. Uncle Bill, as always, expressed himself simply and categorically. But now what's the point? And only the faithful Sam, waiting for Dave at home, exuberantly happy at his owner's arrival, reminded him of his past happy life. During one of his binge days, Dave finally kicked the office workers, who had been pestering him with various questions for a long time, out of the workshop and gladly immersed himself in a complex engine repair. The work completely engrossed him, and he didn't immediately pay attention to the female voice coming from the small manager's office. "I called. You booked me for a repair and now you won't take my car? This is outrageous. I won't leave on principle, do you hear?" "Hello." David, wiping his hands as he walked, approached the workshop manager, Mark, who was listening to the woman with a suffering expression. The lady, judging by everything, was very irritated and accompanied her words with energetic gestures. "May I know what happened?" He looked at the woman and smiled kindly. However, it wasn't difficult to smile genuinely at her. Despite her nervous mood, the lady turned out to be a pretty young woman of about 25 with huge gray eyes, a turned-up nose, and long, fluffy light bangs that she constantly blew out of her face with a funny, loud exhale. "Hello!" She turned sharply to David. "Another specialist! Am I supposed to tell my story to everyone here? Maybe instead of talking, one of you will finally get to my car." "My dear girl," David said softly, and was inwardly very surprised by the thoughtlessly but completely sincerely uttered word. After Sarah's death, he had not felt anything remotely resembling emotion towards any woman. "I'm not your dear girl," the lady interrupted him decisively. "Okay, not dear. Girl." Dave didn't let himself be thrown off. "Let's calm down and figure out the situation. What exactly happened?" "Tell it again?" she gasped indignantly. "Mark." David looked questioningly at the manager standing next to him, who had been staring intently at the problem all this time. David Robert, it's simple. Mark stepped forward decisively. The woman. He glanced at the piece of paper he held in his hand. Helen Bill did indeed book an appointment with us, but unfortunately during the phone call, she incorrectly stated the make of her car, and now everything's clear. I tried to explain to the lady that we can't repair her car because we don't have the equipment for that make. She needs to go to a dealership service center, but Helen Bill doesn't want to listen to me. Well, there you go. Mark spread his hands, his whole demeanor indicating what he thought of certain ladies who understood nothing and didn't want to listen to smart people. Understood. David, having listened to Mark, shifted his gaze to the woman and smiled slightly. Helen Bill, I'm not mistaken. I'm afraid we really can't help you. But I'll write down the address for you now. Call them. And I think... Listen, I don't care what you think. Your sign says auto service, right? She pointed expressively at her car. Car? Right? So what? She looked at Dave ironically. So you'll repair it. Helen Bill, please understand, it's in your best interest. Dave paused for a few seconds, searching for arguments. If, God forbid, you suddenly have a toothache, you'll go to a dentist, not an ophthalmologist, right? And if by mistake you accidentally end up at an ophthalmologist's, you wouldn't demand that he still deal with your tooth, would you? Mark snorted, trying to stifle a laugh. Some nonsense, the woman muttered, feigning inflexibility, although it was already clear that she was tired of arguing. But she decided to have the last word. Fine. I promise I won't let this go. I'll complain to your superiors, and not to some manager or some other boss. I'll complain to your owner, the proprietor, I don't know, in short, whoever is in charge here. Really, it's simply unbelievable. A client comes in, and they refuse her. What kind of business is this? She looked indignantly at the service workers, who were now openly laughing, having started listening to the conversation and eagerly awaiting the outcome. Well, that's your right. In that case, to not put things off, allow me to introduce myself, David began. What do I care about you? She stamped her foot in indignation. A rather high heel twisted, the girl swayed and would have fallen if David hadn't caught her arm. He smelled a light, barely perceptible scent of tart perfume, and her silky hair brushed his cheek for a second. And suddenly he felt excitement and surprise. He was alive again, immersed in these forgotten sensations, a little scared by them. He didn't immediately understand what she was saying. Helen pulled her hand, which he was still holding, away from him and said, In short, get ready, you and you. She quickly pointed a finger at Mark and David. I'll make sure you're fired. Clear? She looked back indignantly at the now openly laughing mechanics. The next day he worked in his office at the firm's central headquarters and was hardly surprised when the door burst open and Helen entered swiftly, with a stubborn expression on her face. She sat down resolutely in the chair opposite him. Well, I must tell you that with employees like those down there, you'll soon be ruined. I bring in a car, and they refuse to take it. The model, you see, isn't right. They've become completely insolent, especially one of them, not young. Instead of doing his job, he decided to get acquainted with me, as if I care what his name is. And he was... She stopped in confusion mid-sentence with a smile, finally looking at David. After a few seconds, she brushed her 2 long bangs from her face with a familiar gesture and smiled shyly. Oh, it's you, the woman said in surprise. Yes, it's me. My name is David Robert, and you are Helen Bill, I remember. He stood up from the desk and bowed gallantly. You're a joker. You're the owner of this establishment, it turns out. Then why were you in the workshop looking like that? It's strange. Well, why strange? It's quite normal. It would be strange if I worked in the workshop in a suit. Okay, Helen, let's leave my strange behavior. Let's better decide what we should do about you. Meaning? She asked in surprise. Well, how? You probably understand that I cannot fulfill your demand to fire everyone, including myself, David said seriously. Helen looked at him and unexpectedly burst out laughing. The laughter was so sincere and contagious that David involuntarily laughed along with her, easily and cheerfully, as he hadn't laughed in 2 years. Well, yes, I suppose my complaint is hopeless, Helen said, still sobbing with laughter. Well, okay, David Robert. It was nice to meet you despite everything. She stood up from the chair and extended her hand to him. He took her thin, narrow hand in his and involuntarily covered it with his other hand, holding it. Bill. Helen, forgive my impudence, but perhaps you would agree to have dinner with me, as compensation for not repairing your car. After all, I must respond to your complaint, right? He said, surprised by his own words. Dave suddenly, for the first time since Sarah's death, wanted to talk to a woman, to touch her hand again, to feel the light, subtle scent of perfume with some unusual tart fragrance. For David, this was a completely new sensation. His whole life, only two women existed for him, his mother and Sarah. All other representatives of the fairer sex, even the most beautiful and intelligent, were just people to him. He was hopelessly lost to romantic adventures. Women's charms, which were tried on him repeatedly, simply had no effect. He loved Sarah, wanted to be only with her, and the thought of experiencing any new sensations related to women simply didn't cross his mind. Well, if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's Davy's fidelity, Sarah used to laugh. Your husband, by the way, is a catch. Where is he now? Do you even know? At work, you say? Oh, really? Watch out. You'll sit around in your sweatpants and they'll steal your man. Well, if they steal him, then that's fate, Sarah replied philosophically, but she was being cunning. For some reason, she was completely confident in her Davy, and every day in his eyes, she saw that her confidence was justified. So, do you accept the offer? He looked into Helen's face and smiled. You know I do, Helen suddenly replied. 20-year-old Helen was charming. At the same time, she made no effort to make a special impression on David, to charm or seduce him. She seemed not to care if her hair was perfectly in place or if she had eaten all her lipstick along with her steak. By the way, Helen had an excellent appetite, and in her company, David ate with genuine pleasure for the first time in 2 years. Despite the age difference of more than 20 years, they found an astonishing number of common topics for conversation. For example, Helen learned about the Labrador Sam and was absolutely delighted, being an old dog person. Despite the somewhat scandalous beginning of their acquaintance, Helen turned out to be a light-hearted, cheerful, kind person. I don't know what came over me, she laughed, recalling the scene she made in the workshop. Honestly, I've never acted like that before. It was like I went off the rails. Please forgive me, David Robert. But first of all, it's not David Robert. It's Dave. We agreed, Nell. David gently chided her. And secondly, because of your dramatic entrance, I'm glad things turned out this way. And I'm glad, very, Helen suddenly replied. A year later, David, rejuvenated, with shining eyes and straightened shoulders, sat in his office holding a small velvet box. Inside lay a magnificent ring, a ring for Helen. I love her. I love Nell, he thought. Maybe as much as I loved Sally once, or almost as much. I don't know. What's the point of comparing? I just want her to be by my side as my wife. Always, or at least for as long as possible. He became agitated, jumped up, and paced around the office. Okay, what if she says yes? What if she just ignores my age, everything, and says yes? Nell, she's like that, she can. What should I do? David was afraid to voice the main, essentially the only problem, Jack. Jack and his possible reaction to all this, to Helen, to his father, who had suddenly decided to continue living, not just see out his days. Son, I need to talk to you. Every word was a struggle for David. He couldn't sit still, jumped up, and paced the room. He went to the window, deliberately, slowly, and carefully adjusted the fold of the curtain. Then he walked back to the armchair he had just been sitting in, sat down, but got back on his feet after a couple of seconds. Jack said nothing all this time, watching his father. The silence was clearly dragging on. Dad, Jack finally said, maybe you'll tell me what you wanted. What did I want to say? David repeated senselessly, nervously smoothing the perfectly ironed collar of his shirt on his chest. His hand was visibly trembling. Jack, Well, it's hard for me to talk to you about this, but I want to be honest with you. I'm really counting on you to support and understand me. In short, I've met a woman, Dave finally said, what seemed to him the hardest words in his life. She's good, smart, decent, beautiful. In short, I like her very much, and it seems, strangely enough, she likes me too. I'd like to introduce you to her, Dave mumbled, not daring to look up at his son. What about Mom? Came the voice above him. What about Mom? Jack! He finally looked Jack in the eye. Mom is gone. Long gone. I loved your mother very much, son. Very much. And I still love her and miss her terribly. You know that perfectly well. Miss her? Really? Well, I'll be, Jack snorted ironically, but I see that doesn't stop you from having flings. Don't you dare talk to me in that tone. David found the strength to look sternly at his son. And choose your words, please. Listen, Father. Jack called him Father for the first time in his life, not Dad. And this unfamiliar, somehow alien, as if forged word unpleasantly grated on David's ear. Maybe this is some kind of joke? You're playing a trick on me, aren't you? Come on, admit it. No, Jack, I'm not playing a trick on you. This is not a joke. I really want to introduce you to Helen. I would like... I don't want to meet any Mary, the guy shouted. Not Mary, but Helen, David corrected his son. It doesn't matter. Mary, Helen, Karen, or even a Mandarin. I don't care. I don't give a damn, understand? Don't you dare bring her here. Got it? Jack yelled. All right then. David got up from the armchair and paced the room. He barely refrained from slapping his son. I dare remind you that this is my apartment, and I will decide what I do, both now and later. Do you hear me? He looked at Jack. And if you don't like something, well, let's decide. Will we live together or not? David's voice didn't tremble and didn't betray the turmoil that was raging in his soul and head. It seemed he managed to look determined and firm because Jack stopped shouting and watched his father silently and intently. And suddenly he blurted out, Are you really going to kick me out of the house because of some... Careful, Jack! David sharply interrupted his son. Careful! Think before you say something that can't be excused or corrected later. Dad, what's wrong? You're already 50-something, and your heart's acting up. Jack had evidently changed tactics and brought forward the heaviest, most ruthless arguments. What kind of courting can there be at your age? It's time for you to retire, think about your pension, and suddenly you've decided to start courting women in your old age, Jack almost shouted, having completely crossed all boundaries. David listened to his son's hysterical shouts. Of course, Jack, overwhelmed by resentment and jealousy towards a strange woman, was clearly overdoing it, with the maximalism with which 16-year-olds judge older generations. The guy was talking absolute nonsense, and yet David clearly understood the wall of rejection and misunderstanding he was about to face. Lord, what am I doing? David suddenly thought clearly, continuing to listen to Jack's screams. What am I doing? She's half my age, and Jack's reaction is typical. Everyone will think that, if not say it. Absolutely everyone. Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you, Davy, Helen exclaimed with delight, disregarding modesty. I really want to be your wife. Thank you, Nell. I'm so happy. Only forgive me. We need to talk. He struggled to find and force out the words, although he had already rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his mind. Nell, you see, I'm, to put it mildly, not a boy, he mumbled. I understand perfectly. I'm not a girl either, Helen chuckled. Nell, darling, but you know what I mean, don't you? He sighed painfully. Yes, I know, of course. Her voice became hard. You are significantly older, and I am unforgivably young, and I'm marrying you solely for your money, to take everything you have and run off abroad with a young lover. Oh, and this too, you have a bad heart. I can take advantage of that, finish you off, and voila, I'm the heiress to everything. They'll tell you that many times too. Helen, he exclaimed. No, let's talk. Let's say all this nastiness out loud. I know all this perfectly well, Dave, and I also know that you're ruining everything right now. You're ruining possibly the happiest moment of my life. Davy, my dear darling, let's do this. Helen wiped away her tears, lifted her face, and looked intently into his eyes. Either you believe me completely and entirely, in my sincerity, in my feelings for you, or right now we say goodbye to each other. He looked into her eyes and believed, once and for all, at least at that moment, he thought it was forever. Helen moved into their large apartment, and by that time Jack, a second-year student, was living in a dormitory. The relationship between Jack and Helen, despite all of David's hopes, was, to put it mildly, separate. David and Helen and Jack, even more unclear and unpredictable. Something was clearly happening between him and Helen, and David tried many times to find out what exactly. Jack, what's going on? Listen, Father, I'm a man. You yourself just recently rubbed my nose in that. Yeah, helped, didn't I? His son chuckled ironically. Well, actually, you created this problem yourself. You're talking about Helen. I'm talking about my life. That's it. Leave me alone. His son cut him off. Jack, don't you dare talk to me like that. His father tried to call his son to order and immediately gave up. Jack, how about I buy you an apartment? Having gotten nowhere with Jack, he tried another approach. Helen, we need to talk. What's going on between you and Jack? My dear, I won't say everything is perfect, but basically nothing terrible. A typical story about a stepmother and a stepson. Well, stepmothers are never good. But I'm trying very hard. And anyway, she hesitated. David felt that something very important was hidden behind Jack's aggression and Helen's playfulness. And this something didn't let David live peacefully. It bothered him like a sore tooth. And so he sat on a bench in the park, stroked Sam's golden ears, and thought about what to do. How to understand what was happening in his home. And if he suddenly heard something resembling the truth from one of them, he simply wouldn't have the courage to believe it. He had to see and understand everything himself without his son and wife knowing, as disgusting as it was for him to secretly watch them. Alex, hello. David dialed his deputy's number. Please give me the phone number of the company that installed the video surveillance system for us. The next day, a quick-witted young man taught David the intricacies of surveillance. The camera is tiny, you can install it anywhere. Better higher up so they don't accidentally bump into it. He lowered his voice mysteriously. There's no sound, but the image will be top quality at any distance. The firm guarantees it. Having installed the camera in the living room of the apartment, David went to work, sank tiredly into the armchair in his office, and turned on his laptop. There was no sound, but the image was clear, just as the technician had promised. Jack was the first to come home. He wandered around the apartment, then returned to the living room and settled right opposite the camera, turning on the huge wall-sized television. The guy sat on the sofa in a relaxed, casual pose. Alone in the apartment, he had no need to play the role of the offended or the deprived. His face, so much like Sarah's face, so familiar and dear, caused a pang of poignant, acute love for his son and David, who was watching the monitor. He desperately wanted to drop everything, run home, grab this long-legged, tousle-haired, snub-nosed creature, his Jackie, and hug him tightly. Ask for forgiveness for everything done and not done. Tell him how much he loved his son. Lost in his feelings, David didn't immediately realize that something was happening in the apartment. Jack's posture changed. He remained on the sofa, but he tensed up, as if bristling. The familiar, sullen, angry grimace appeared on his face. Instead of the sweet, nice Jackie, a copy of Sally, a wary, angular guy sat on the sofa, from whom anxiety and aggression literally emanated. Helen entered the room. Judging by the movement of their lips, they were talking. Helen smiled slightly, apparently asking Jack something. He, lounging further on the sofa and putting his feet up on the glass table, put on a crooked smirk and evidently replied, squinting and barely parting his lips. Helen turned and left the room. David couldn't hear what they were saying, but one thing was obvious. Jack was not at all like a miserable outcast with a cruel, suffering stepmother, and Helen had clearly not turned into a fury in her husband's absence. Rather, it seemed that Jack was behaving in his usual rude manner, and Helen was trying to smooth things over with patience and calmness. David, without knowing why, continued to watch his son sitting in the living room. Jack suddenly looked in the direction Helen had gone, stood up, and with cautious movements, clearly trying not to make noise, moved towards his father's office. Having disappeared from the frame, he reappeared on the monitor a couple of minutes later. One hand was tucked into his jeans pocket, and it looked very much like he had just put something in there. A familiar dull ache started in his chest on the left. David gasped. At that moment, he suddenly felt like an ancient old man who didn't even have the strength to move his legs. So Jack had betrayed him after all. Jack, not Helen. Jack was tormenting Helen and, it seemed, was quietly taking money from the safe in the office. Well, at least that was quite easy to find out. That same evening, upon returning home, David discovered that a rather substantial sum had significantly dwindled over the few weeks he hadn't looked in his safe. He didn't talk to his son, but simply waited, not knowing what for. And he waited. A few days later, he saw Jack carry a small rectangular box out of the office, which contained Sally's few but expensive jewels that Dave had given her. Sarah loved wearing jewelry, calling it our diamond fund. "I need to talk to you," David said the next evening. "Well?" Jack snapped back habitually. "Money has been disappearing from our house, and not just money." To Jack's credit, he tried his best to appear calm and indifferent, but he wasn't very good at it. "Why are you so sure I took the money?" Jack smiled awkwardly, or rather bared his teeth, hiding his fear behind it all. "There's another person in our apartment, a complete stranger, by the way. Maybe we should ask her? Maybe our young wife doesn't have enough?" "All right then," David spoke through clenched teeth, feeling the familiar dull pain in his chest. "The money, of course, if it's still intact, you can keep. Give back the jewelry and get out." Jack left the room. A few minutes later, he returned. "Here's all your money." He threw a wallet at his father's feet. "I didn't take a single ruble. You can count it. And I won't give you the jewelry. They'll be kept with me. You can call and file a theft report. I don't care. I won't give them back even if they put me in prison. These are Mom's jewels. I won't let some strange woman wear them. Do you hear?" By the end of the sentence, Jack's voice, trembling more and more, finally broke, and the guy, unable to bear it, sobbed. David stared at his son with wide eyes. The shell of resentment, cynicism, and lies seemed to fall away from Jack's face. Before him stood his beloved, only son, his and Sarah's, their golden boy, confused and lost in his fantasies and delusions, but still his own Jack, still hopelessly missing his mother, and having driven that longing so deep inside that it had turned into hatred. Hatred for his father, for Helen, for the whole world around him where there was no mother. "Jack, forgive me," David said quietly. Jack lifted his tear-stained face to his father and said softly, in a barely audible whisper, "And you forgive me, Dad. Forgive me for this. And for Helen. I love you, Dad." David took a few steps and squeezed his son's outstretched hand with all his might, and around them, jumping, barking happily, and gleaming with golden fur, not knowing what he was so happy about, was Sam.